Welcome to Heat Treat Radio. Heat Treat today is honored to bring you today's episode recognizing MG Timothy Joseph Wright's long career in the U.S. Army. TJ served our nation in the midst of Vietnam and Desert Storm, as well as through peace efforts in Europe. In sharing his background in heat treatment and the military, MG Wright describes a life of family, strategy, and leadership. Our sponsor, C3 Data, was founded by Nathan and Matt Wright, two of MG Wright's sons. More on them later in today's show. Start off by just sharing a little bit about some bio information about yourself. So could you introduce yourself, who you are, maybe where you grew up?
Yeah. My name is Timothy Joseph Wright. I spent my younger years up until the 8th grade in Phoenix, Arizona with my family, of which I have 3 brothers. Moved back to Fort Wayne, Indiana, midterm in the 8th grade year. Went to New Haven High School. Worked in a garage for my grandfather, 8th grade and through my sophomore year. And then after that, my dad, the reason we moved back to Fort Wayne was he was running a heat treat for it's called National Heat Treat. It doesn't exist anymore, but for those folks. So I got a job running tool steel on second shift. There was a metallurgist there. His name was Carl Bobé, and he taught me how to mount samples and read microstructures, and I learned how to run furnaces. And in those days, we took dew points with a little dry ice cup and a thing and a thermometer on it. Just to give you some concept of how the technology's changed over the last 50 years. It's pretty amazing. But that caused me or afforded me the ability to get a job after high school as a metallurgical technician working for International Harvester. And about midway through my second year working there, I got my notice to come down and take a physical to go here to Indianapolis. And when I got to the end, I asked the sergeant, I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Well, you'll probably be back here in 60 to 90 days. You'll probably be drafted," because the Vietnam War was heating up. And so I talked to my dad. He was a World War II vet, as was my grandfather and my uncle. And he said if it was me, he would enlist and get choice, not chance. So I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And I was sitting at home feeling sorry for myself. And the helicopter goes flying across the TV screen, and the Army's looking for helicopter pilots. And I said, if I'm going, that's what I'm going to do. So I enlisted in the Army, took all the physicals, took the tests, and made the qualification. So that's how my career started.
When you're making that decision, it sounds like your family was a big support for you as you're making that transition to enlist.
Yeah, family's everything. And it's not just, and after you're in the service, you learn to recognize that it's not just your family, but it's your compatriots and your fellow soldiers and airmen's families too. You care about because it impacts everybody when something happens that's good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, after you enlisted, what year was that when you enlisted?
1966, I believe.
Yeah. And was that before, it sounds like before you went to get your college education?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So then how did that come about? Was it through the Army that you decided to?
So I enlisted in the Army, went to Vietnam, came back from Vietnam. I was an instructor pilot then at Fort Walters, Texas. Mm-hmm. And I taught I called them young because I was all of 22 or so, 23 maybe. And people that we didn't wear seatbelts in those days, to give you some idea how to strap in the helicopter, how to wear the helmet, how to talk on the radio, how to hover. Yeah, just make helicopter pilots out of them.
Wow.
And then at the end, when my time was up, I enlisted 4 years, we were up, they wanted me to stay in the Army and offered me a direct commission. And I said, I don't think I want to go back to Vietnam again, thanks. So I got off active duty. Lindsay and I, in the meantime, while I was in the Army, Lindsay and I got married, and we were in Texas, and I knew I wanted to be a pilot. So Purdue has a great aviation professional pilot program, and I applied to go to that, and I was accepted. And so we spent the next 3 years at Purdue, and then I was joined the National Guard at that time, and I was a warrant officer initially, and then once again they offered me a direct commission to become a commissioned officer, so I accepted it and became a second lieutenant. And
so moving back to when you were in Vietnam, because that was your first experience, I guess, out in war. I imagine it was probably pretty foundational to how you approached your other deployments.
Gave me a real insight to being led and leadership. I was in a air cavalry troop, Alpha Troop, 3rd to 17th Air Cav, and we had Cobra gunships, as you saw in the museum. We had OH-6 Scout helicopters and UH-1 Huey lift ships, and we had an infantry platoon. And the mission of the troop was to go out and find bad guys and kill them. And if we needed to put boots on the ground, we would insert our platoon on the ground and we'd provide them gunship cover. And I'm trying to remember the exact date, but we were down in the south, and we got in a fight with a North Vietnamese regiment, which is a large troop concentration, and there were 6 Silver Stars given out that day, which is the nation's 3rd highest award, and I was one of the recipients, and 5 of my other pilots were recipients also that day, because there was a lot of heroism going on, a lot of aircraft getting shot down and people rescuing other people and blowing up sampans and shooting people, and yeah, it was.
That must have been, I mean, to try to remember, how long was the engagement?
It was probably 18 hours. Once it got dark, things kind of settled down, and by then we had inserted had a backup for the 9th Infantry Division, and they had inserted several battalions into the area, and we provided gun cover for those guys after that. But the initial stage was pretty hectic.
I can imagine. Do you remember where you were when you got the mission, or when you received?
It was like an everyday mission, and we're going to go down and scout this area out. And we got down there and then almost immediately got engaged and start calling for help and get the whole troop committed. Yeah. And then more, artillery and. Yeah.
Wow. So when you say it was like a normal day, can you actually flesh that out a little bit? What does a normal day, or what did a normal day look like in Vietnam?
Well, we ran generally 24-hour operations. We did night missions and daytime missions, and we always had an aircraft on standby. For instance, one time I was a standby gunship guy, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, they come and wake me up and said, "You got to go. Call operations. They'll brief you on guard or on the ops channel." So I get in the aircraft, which is already pre-flighted and ready to go, and start it up and get airborne. And they said, "Well, there's an ARVN company, at this grid coordinates, head south," and headed down there, and they said they're in contact and they need support. The advisor's asking for Army gunship support. So a little while after that, I get another call from operations saying there's another ARVN company in the same general location, and they're also receiving fire, and the advisor's asking for support. And as I came up on the area, I could see these tracers going this way and going this way. And I looked at it and I thought about that for a little bit, and I told both the advisors, "Okay, everybody cease fire." And all the firing stopped, because it was just 2 ARVN companies that were shooting up one another. And so I just turned around and went home.
Wow.
Yeah.
That kind of decision making on your part, did you have to do a lot of that often when
Almost every day.
Every day?
Yeah. I mean, just flying around, and the scout guy would be looking for tracks or something, because as soon as they heard you coming, they would go hide, and I would be flying cover for him in case he got shot at. And there was a big, mostly in the Delta kind of area, but a big palm tree, nipple palm area near a river, and he was on one end of the trees or palm trees, and I was on the other end. I go around the corner to the other side, and there's a Disca 51 caliber weapon, which on a big tripod, and about 5 guys. They got a camo net over it, and they're trying to pull it off so they can engage me, but I engaged them well before they ever got it done. So,
was there a moment when you were out in Vietnam when your leadership was really put to the test? It was a challenging situation. Maybe it was officers you were working with.
Yeah. Well, one instance that comes to mind was we were supporting an infantry battalion. They were on the ground and they were pretty heavily engaged. And the battalion commander was in a CNC bird command and control aircraft overhead. And it became pretty obvious to me that he had lost perception of what the situation was on the ground. So I was pretty aware as a gunship pilot about keeping track of what's going on in the battle. So on another frequency, I was telling him where his guys were and what they needed to do, and helped him do what he was supposed to do, because he just was not aware of the situation. He'd lost contact with what was going on. Yeah,
that would have been quite dangerous. So stepping in, quite a key move. So then you said that you came back from Vietnam, married Lindsay, and you were serving the National Guard. Yes. At that point.
I think I was the second helicopter pilot to join the Indiana National Guard. And in those days, they had Korean War vintage aircraft, really old stuff. But one of the things that really got me interested was the Vietnam veterans just kept coming, and we have a lot in common,
Yeah.
A lot of expertise, and it was enjoyable to be around my guys,
Yeah. You go somewhere, you have all those experiences, daily experiences. That's so different from here in the U.S. I can imagine the camaraderie, or being able to support each other also and coming back.
It was interesting as you think about. At that point, then all these guys had all this experience, as did I, and we would talk, but they also were getting on with their lives, mostly a lot of warrant officers, and they were going on to be dentists or pilots, and it was interesting.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So then how did you get pulled? Because at some point you were involved with Desert Storm. Where was that in the timeline?
So as time went on, I had gotten a direct commission, and I was a captain, and I figured I was ready to be a major. And somehow, all my assignments, I was an operator, so I was involved in doing stuff. That's in what we called it at that level, the S3 kind of thing. And I ended up on the division staff as a G1, which is personnel pushing. And I was very unsatisfied with my assignment, and I was pretty vocal about it. And one day, the division commander called me into his office, and he had this big printout, and he said, "Well, you flip through it, and your number, whatever I was, 250th on the promotion list, and when your time comes, you'll get promoted." And I said, "Well, thank you, sir." I said, "But I don't want to be promoted for just coming to drill." And I went home that night, and I got a call from a guy in the Army Reserve saying, "Hey, we're looking for an aviator in the 21st Support Command," and he told me what their mission was, and it's a major's job. So I said, okay. So I transferred out of the Guard and went to the Army Reserve. And great assignment. Great guys, smart guys, interesting. Lots of opportunities to go overseas and participate with the real 21st Command, which is the support command for all the European theater. So sitting at home one Sunday morning having coffee and the phone rings, and we would do test alerts. And I answered the phone. I said, "This is a raging bull," meaning it's a real thing. Alert.
Yeah.
And you need to be at the armory as quickly as possible. So but we got mobilized to go to Desert Storm right there on the spot, you know. It took us, I think we were there in a couple of weeks, probably, huh?
Wow.
Yeah.
That mobilization, what is, speaking to someone that doesn't have much experience, but what does that look like?
We immediately sent an advance team to Saudi Arabia, so we'd have a touch point on the ground. And we loaded up all our equipment, which we don't have a lot of equipment. And we got a stipend and a laundry list of stuff from General Pagonis' staff, who was the Army logistics guy for the entire Army in the theater. Computers, copy machines, telephones, all kinds of stuff to bring. So I was one of the guys that got engaged just to purchase all that stuff and get it ready to go on the 141 and go off to war with us. So in a very short period of time, we committed pretty close to $750,000 in stuff that we needed to take with us. And we all packed up on 3 141 Starlifters, which is the predecessor to the C-17 today, with all that equipment and all our people, and flew to Rota, Spain, refueled, got back on the airplane, and went to Saudi Arabia. Landed in the middle of the night.
What was your first impression? I mean, middle of the night, you couldn't really see impressed much, but
well, it was early in the war, before Christmas in 1990, and we General Pagonis was absconding with everything he could do to fulfill his mission. You know, buying buses, renting buses, trucks, whatever he needed could get. And we put the whole organization on about 5 school buses and went to Bahrain, where we were going to be stationed, and got places to stay, sleep, and rest our head, kind of thing.
Yeah. Was it? I guess it was around Christmas, right before you said Christmas that you arrived. Yeah. And what when you arrived versus when you arrived in Vietnam, maybe could you feel the difference in setting the environment?
It was, you know, Vietnam was well organized, and you went in and you didn't know where you were going, so you went to the reception station and they gave you a set of orders and told you to go find yourself on a cot. We'll call you when your transportation to wherever it was you were going comes. So that's kind of how I got my assignment. Here, I stayed with the organization that I deployed with, and we all had our separate jobs. I was actually the senior aviation logistician for Army aircraft in the theater as a major. Normally that's a full colonel's job. And so making sure that we had all the fuel, bullets, parts, and maintenance that they needed. For instance, I had operational control of 1,200 DynCorp guys. They're a civilian contractor who were doing depot level maintenance in the theater. We had to refit all the aircraft with filters. The sand was so damaging that we put tape on the rotor blades to keep them from eroding, you know, being sandblasted, and all kinds of fixes like that on the spot. Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Because I guess when you were in Vietnam, the U.S. had already been there for a couple of years, 2 years, few years. But when you go into for Desert Storm for that, you were the front lines. You were trying to get things moving.
We went right at Dahran. I mean, there was only one corps there at the time we arrived, and they hadn't deployed yet. They were still camped out in the desert right near where we were. And then we got the word that the 7th Corps was supposed to be disbanded, and they were in the process of leaving Europe and coming back to the States, and they did a a right-hand turn with the whole corps and brought them to the desert too. So we had to figure out how we're going to house, food, and feed and place, 300,000 guys and all their equipment. Yeah.
I don't even want to try to figure out that logistical nightmare.
So here's an example of logistics. If you think of it in terms of, you've got 700,000 guys in the theater, and each of them has 2 eggs for breakfast. How much oil does it take to cook them?
Don't know. Do you know?
I don't know, but I know it's a truckload.
It's
a
truckload.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah. And so you arrived before Christmas, and you stayed through the whole operation.
Mm-hmm.
What did that look like as it unfolded? There were some peak parts, I'm sure, in January.
Yeah. So as all the units deployed to their forward staging areas and got ready to start the war, we were doing all these things that I alluded to with taking care of problems. I mean, normally you would get on a set of engines, on a Black Hawk or a Cobra engine, you get 1,000, 1,200 hours on the engine before you take it out and overhaul and put it back in. And we were getting about 100 hours on an set of engines. So the DynCorp guys were rotating these engines in and out, and they were changing them in the field. And eventually what happens is there's only a specific number of parts available, and we would normally get them back and rebuild them and refurbish them and put them back in the supply system. And we didn't have a method at that point to recover. We call them repairables, to recover those and get them back into the system. So I had to develop a system that went to get them and police them up. Initially, I got the Air Force to supply C-130s, and I was riding around going to each one of these aviation brigades and policing up all the reparables and bringing them back. And then the National Guard brought Sherpas, which is a twin-engine, high-wing turboprop, a little mini cargo plane. And I used those guys to not only get reparables back, but to deliver parts. I had almost all the parts that the Army owned in Abu Dhabi. And if aircraft broke or needed a part, you would go submit a document request, and if it was the AOG, aircraft on ground kind of part, they would put a fax request into St. Louis, where the general aviation was managed from, and they would put a fax in a fax machine telling the guys in Abu Dhabi to put it on the Sherpa and where to take it. So we would get less than a 24-hour turnaround on parts delivery. So it was pretty effective. We had 90-some% availability rate across the board. One of the things that to give you an idea of what I did was that when they were briefing General Schwarzkopf on how they were going to start the war, and they were going to use an attack battalion out of the 101st to go in and take the radar stations out so the Air Force could come in and do their attack without getting shot down by the air defense guys. And Lieutenant Colonel Cody was the attack battalion commander. He'd reach Schwarzkopf, so they were going to go into the desert and refuel and attack and then come back out. And Schwarzkopf said, "There's no way that you're going to refuel in the desert." Because you remember when we did during the Carter eras, when we had that Desert One fiasco and the helicopter crashed into the 130 and it was a big mess out there. And he said, "We're not doing it. Find another way to do it." And so General Pagonis and my boss, Tom Jones, I'm the aviation guy, so they look at me and I said, "Well, there's this thing called the ERF system, Extended Range Fuel System, and I know that there's 200 of them in Kaiserslautern, and we can just send some airplane, 141 up to get what we need, and unmount a rack of 4 Hellfire missiles, put 300 gallons of fuel on that thing, and then go in and out without refueling. And if you need more missiles, just take more airplanes." So that's exactly what happened.
Nice.
Yeah.
It is quite amazing the logistics, and to be able to make sure that what happens in the field goes down how it needs to.
Right.
Because you can plan all you want and say, well, we're going to send in these people, and this is what they're going to do. So they have the fuel for it.
Yeah.
To come back.
Yeah.
And someone needs to be thinking about it. And if they don't what's the solution?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you got a plan for rearming, refueling, recovery of downed vehicles, wounded, and POWs. I mean, after the first day of the ground war, we had 80,000 POWs.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So you got to feed and house these guys, you know, and I mean, they were just surrendering like crazy as fast as they could, but they didn't want to die.
Yeah. So you have to honor that, but you know, how do you fulfill that?
Yeah.
You know, that's quite impressive. What so how did you end your time with that Desert Storm? Was it a slow end, or was it a quick in, quick out?
Yeah. Well, at the end of the war,
yeah,
the divisions all came back and prepared to redeploy back to their home stations. So by then General Pagonis had been promoted to 4-star, and he had a 2-star deputy, and we had a huge heliport that keep these aircraft on, and not enough to cover 2 corps worth of, not 1,700 helicopters, but so I had a plan how we're going to, because you got to clean these aircraft and make sure there's no dirt on them, and get them ready to get on a ship and ship them back to wherever it was they were going. And the deputy called me in one day and said, "You got to find another place to go because I'm taking over the heliport." And his plan was to use that to redeploy all the other equipment, tanks, APCs, trucks, everything had to be packaged up and ready to redeploy back to home station. So I stood my ground as much as I could, was a 2-star general, and I got a slice of the heliport. And so then I reorganized my plan, and in order they would bring their aircraft in, and we would wash them and get them ready to redeploy, and then fly the aircraft to the port, take the rotor blades off of them, and
with the
seal. We put shrink wrap over the whole thing and put them on the ship and send them back.
How long did that take? How many days or weeks?
It was a better part of a month, I would say.
A month, yeah. So, it's a lot of equipment to keep count.
Yeah, well, a set of rotor blades, a rotor blade for a Black Hawk helicopter cost about $100,000. One, it has 5 rotor blades on it, I think. And when they came over, they put all those rotor blades in shipping containers for rotor blades. But when they got to the desert, they turned those shipping containers upside down and used them for floor tents. So I had to figure out how to get the rotor blades home safely, and they didn't have any chains to chain the aircraft down on the ship, so I had to figure all that out. One of the other guys, Larry McIntyre, who was the everything else guy, and he bought pressure washers, thousands of them.
Oh.
Yeah, and he set up a repairs facility and had parts because things would die, and because they were using them 24/7 and changed the oil in them regularly, and yeah.
Oh man. Do you? So you're still, when you get back, National Guard still, and your rank is.
So what happened is I came back from Desert Storm, and I got a call from the Adjutant General's Chief of Staff, and he said, "Hey, we want you to come back to the Guard." And I said, "Doing what?" And he said, "Well, we have on the state staff, we have a G1 position, which is the reason I left in the first place. I didn't want to be in the G shop." And he said, and it's a lieutenant colonel's job." I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And he said, "You won't be there long." So I transferred back to the National Guard, got promoted to lieutenant colonel. 3 months later, I got transferred to the Aviation Brigade, and as the operations officer was there, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, and then they made me the commander. So.
Okay, yeah. As commander, what was your role as commander in seeing these operations?
Wait, say again.
What was your role as commander?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting time because at that point in time, and we talked earlier about all the old aircraft that we had, and we had, in the meantime, transitioned to Hueys and OH-58s, but we were positioning ourselves now to get Blackhawks, which is the Army's premier lift aircraft. And so I started sending guys to school, transitioning pilots and getting the crew maintenance guys spun up and looking at maintenance facilities and getting them organized.
Very good, yeah. How long were you in that position?
I was the brigade commander, I think, for probably 18 months or so. And then I got promoted to brigadier general and became the assistant division commander.
Okay, yeah. And again, more strategy planning.
Yeah, more higher level expertise,
Right, yeah. What were some of the responsibilities that came with it, or one of the tasks that you accomplished?
Well, I wasn't there very long because I got activated to go take over the U.S. command in Bosnia.
Yeah, so how were you chosen or activated for that?
The plan is normally every 6 months they would rotate a unit in and out of Bosnia, and I was told that we were going to be the last rotation, and that the U.S. was leaving Bosnia.
Yeah.
And my job was to continue the peace enforcement and do a handoff and to the EUCOM, European Theater.
Yeah.
Take over the mission. So we mobilized an infantry battalion out of the 38th Division, along with an aviation section, and myself and a staff. And we trained here in the States for 30 days. And then we went to Grafenwehr for 30 days and got some more training, spun up. And then we deployed into Bosnia with all our equipment and people.
Wow, yeah. Now, Bosnia-Herzegovina, that part of history is not well covered, and I'm sure that people who are listening to our interview would probably appreciate a scope of what that is, at least from your perspective.
So that all started during the Clinton era, and he said we'd just be there a year. We were there, far longer than that, and the mission was peace enforcement. So peace enforcement is that all the protagonists that are involved, just tell them to cease fire. And I'm going to force you to cease fire, and I got the horsepower to do it. And so we had the Serbs, the Croats, and the Muslims all shooting at one another in various forms and fashions. And the General Zucic, one of the Serbian commanders, came to my office one day and he said, "So if I started rolling my tanks," we were in Tuzla, "down this road, what would you do?" And I said, "You see those 8 Apache helicopters with the Hellfire missiles out there? You wouldn't make it to my compound, I can tell you that right now."
So the tension levels were still really high when you got there?
Not so much. I mean, everybody, it's probing, sticking to see how you feel. And probably after I was there 3 months, the realization that we were actually going to leave and that things needed to be normalized started to set in, and people started saying, leaders, that we don't want you to go. Stop. We want you to stay here. But it was time to go home.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of how it is once peace is starting to set in, the appreciation for the authority that brought it about.
Right. They were very grateful. Serb, Croats, or Muslim, didn't matter. They were happy it was going to be over and that they could finally get back to some sense of normalcy. But huge scars, the Serbs in one felt swoop killed 6,000 Muslims, and they were throwing their bodies in the Sava River. And I mean, that's a lot of bodies. And they had mass graves. We were still finding mass graves when I was there in rotation 15. We had a no-knock policy, so unlike in this country, unless you got a warrant, you can't come into somebody's house. We could just go whenever we want. We would still find things, because there's still some idiots out there. And here's for instance, one of my guys in a no-knock search found a Barrett sniper rifle, a U.S. Army Barrett sniper rifle, which is about a $50,000 piece of equipment, and somehow made its way to Bosnia-Herzegovina. I got a nice picture of myself shooting that out at the range before we put it back in the supply system.
Oh, wow. How did you prepare for handling the relationships that you found over there?
Yeah, well, there were Bosnia and Herzegovina was divided up into three sections: the U.S., and when I was there, the Canadian, and the Spanish had the South thing. And General Beer, who was the Canadian commander, he and I met with our boss, General Packett, and discussed about guidance and what we want to do. And one of the things that we implemented was moving people out of the cantonment area, the FOB, into the villages, so people would be comfortable and come and tell us where the sniper rifles were hid and that kind of stuff. And that was a very successful program once we got it launched.
Yeah, I guess weeding out the unrest that in neighborhoods and bringing the peace to a very immediate personal level for those citizens. Yeah. Wow. Was there any resistance to that plan either?
No, I don't think so. That was always a concern for my General Bell was the Army commander in Europe, and he was my support chain while I was a UN commander, NATO. He frequently visited to make sure he was giving me everything that I needed or wanted. And when I told him I was going to do this program where I put the troops out into the villages, he was not a happy camper. He didn't like that idea at all. So when it was difficult to get the logistics for that organized, and so I was telling General Packett that, I'm getting some resistance from General Bell. And he said, well, General Jones, who was the USARA commander, was coming to see me in a week. We'll talk to General Jones about it. And when I told General Jones, he thought it was the greatest thing since sliced butter. So General Bell's habit was every time a four-star would come and see me, he would come down and get debriefed. And I told him that General Bell thought it was a great idea. And he said, yeah, I do too. And he said, what do you need? And I said, well, I need you to get that thing out of your staff because I've got the requirements up there and get it moving. And within a few days, it started moving again. So
we will return to our conversation with MG Wright to hear about the end of his long career and his involvement in heat treat. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Heat treat plays a vital role in manufacturing across the world.
We created C3, the industry's only comprehensive pyrometry software that connects sensors, manufacturers, heat treaters, and labs.
A software-based system that's like having a NADCAP auditor with you every time you perform a pyrometry function.
I was just wrapping up an NADCAP audit back in 2020 in October, and I was stewing about what we had gotten NCRs for. There has to be a better way.
The expectation is that one or two individuals have enough knowledge to know the ever-changing and updating specification of AMS 2750 requirements. In some ways, that's an unrealistic expectation.
We just basically make it so easy for the customer. They push a button, the data comes in digitally, and all the human error is eliminated and tons of time is saved.
Overall, though, what your plans, the plans, I guess, of the U.S. and then of NATO, largely smooth overall at this point.
Oh, yeah. I learned it by then. If everybody wants to know, well, after a while, when are we going home?
Yeah.
And nobody could tell me when we were going home. So, sometimes you can fulfill your own destiny. So I just started briefing when all these people would come to see me, when I give them a little slide presentation, and we expected to depart on the 14th of December. And one day at the Army Operations Center, they were briefing the J3 on what was going on around the world when the Bosnia thing came up, and they said, and they planned to depart on the 14th of December, so it became a fact, you know.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting to see that some decisions aren't made, so
You can influence
you
it.
can
yeah.
influence. So yeah. Some decisions just become as such
Mhm.
because folks like you. Now, did you have a particular desire to get back then as soon as possible, or what were your thoughts on being there versus being with family?
I think from a soldier perspective, it
Yeah.
was a good rotation.
Yeah.
We had good communications. Lindsay and I would talk we text back and forth
Yeah.
every night, and soldiers had the same capability. And you know, one of the problems that you run into in a situation like that is that if were to be a problem or an issue, you need to do something. Everybody has a cell phone. Somehow you got to shut all that stuff off, clamp down on it until I can tell my boss what's going on and what's happening. And one of the things that happened early in the rotation was General Packett told me that he thought there was a Piffwick hiding in a town called Paoli, and so we surrounded the town, airlifted the troops in, surrounded the town. He gave me a British Special Operations group to stay in a Serbian church, and General Packett specifically told them no C4. So the first thing they did was they went up there and blew the doors off this church, and these weren't just little doors; they were, 4 foot wide, 14 foot tall, and 3 inches thick. And unfortunately, with all the hubbub going on, and the priest and his son were coming down the steps of this church when they blew those 2 doors off and just about killed both of them. They got hit by the debris in the doors.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they had an emergency medical doctor with them. They reinflated all their lungs, and I got them on a medevac and got them to the hospital, and they both survived. But that's the kind of situation where you don't want people on their cell phones calling the press, telling them what was going on. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
It's not. Yeah, you don't want to. Yeah, you don't want to brew tension from within.
right.
And how this is such a very different, at least to my mind, so different from your experience out in during the Desert Storm operation. Still a lot of strategy, sure, to do, but quite different. I don't know if you could speak to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, not only did we have U.S. troops there, we had Polish and various other NATO companies and battalions. They had a Turkish battalion, a Polish battalion, Lithuanian platoon. So there was a lot of international coordination between organizations. Some countries would allow me to tell them to do certain things, and certain things they wouldn't let them do it. So you got to speak to that and keep all that stuff on track. But by and large, it was dealing with the Poles and the Turks and everybody else was enjoyable, and we kept them busy.
Yeah. Do you still have contacts from when you were there?
Yeah. So General Beer, who retired from the Canadian Armed Forces as a 3-star, he's been to our place. We have a home in Florida. He's been down there with his wife, and we've been to Canada to visit them. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's such a significant period of time, especially.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I shouldn't say, but I mean, specifically for this instance, you're working within NATO, you're coming together for an end goal, and you actually do get to see some peace by the end of it. Were you pretty satisfied with how relations left off?
Yeah. I mean, we rounded up a lot of stuff. For instance, one time in a joint operation with the Canadians, we found a whole cave full of brand new 4-deuce mortars. You know what a mortar is? It's a tube-like thing. You put a big mortar round in it, and it shoots it, 8 or 10 miles out. Yeah, and probably, I mean, truckloads full of ammunition to go with it. So and it was up in the mountains, so we had to hot-foot it, hand carry it all down to where we'd get it on the trucks and then take it to the EOD place. We had EOD guys were just busy, 7 days a week, just blowing up stuff that we would find and just blow it up.
Yeah. So it doesn't get blown up somewhere else, essentially.
Yeah, it doesn't get used.
Yeah, it doesn't get used, no. That's great. So, and the handoff from the North American Treaty Organization hands off the responsibility of peace to the EU's, is not a stabilization force.
No.
Well, I forget what the term is with that.
The general that was in charge of that for the EU was a Swedish officer, and his staff, they all spoke English, so that made it enjoyable.
That's good.
It just went smoothly. I mean, we had shipping containers. You see these things going around on trucks. We had about 180 of those sitting on the airfield.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And so I had no idea, and nobody in my staff knew what was in them. So when we got the word that it's time to wind this thing down, I took the bolt cutters and go out and start cutting the locks off these shipping containers and see what was in there. And it was just many supply issues, like a mask-mounted OH-58 sight and radar system, and probably cost $2 or $3 million. And I was putting all this stuff back into the supply system, and the way it works is that the unit that returns it to the supply system gets credit for it, and it goes into your commander's account. So the Title 10 guys in Heidelberg, looking at my commander's account, says, "How did you get $54 million in your commander's account?" And I said, "Well, don't touch it. I'm going to spend it." Just joking,
Have a party to throw.
Yeah. So, and as we emptied these containers out, we'd lift them up and put them on a truck and send them back to whoever owned them. And I think we found probably 6 M16s and later M4s, light rifles that were lost, and it's a big deal. When you lose a weapon, you spend weeks looking for it. They were just buried under these shipping containers.
That is interesting. It makes me wonder about your thoughts. This is a bit off topic. I'm not sure if we'll keep it in the interview, but what your thoughts are on when we were on the recent pulling out of, I think we were in not Afghanistan.
Afghanistan?
We were, yeah.
Oh, it was a debacle.
Yeah, because just as you're describing it, just from the strategy end.
Yeah.
The strategy now that happened down in Afghanistan and what we left.
Yeah. It's like we were never there.
Yeah.
We left them $75 billion worth of equipment and left all the people that supported us to the Taliban's whims. I mean, it's...
Looking at that situation, especially coming from your background with strategy, how do you think that should have been handled? Yeah.
Yeah. If I was General Milley, and I wasn't, first of all, giving up the Bagram Air Base was a crazy thing. Leave in the middle of the night, leave our allies there, not to say a word to them, was disgraceful. And that, if we were going to withdraw, that was a perfect place to do it. And I firmly believe that had we left a support contingent to support the administration and the forces, they would have been successful because they had the equipment, they had the people. But they needed the intel and they needed some supply support. So, but the way it worked out was, all the injuries and the supply people that were killed and maimed, and not only just U.S. forces, but other forces and civilians. Yeah, well, I personally would call it a hasty retreat instead of a withdrawal. I mean, it was
right.
Yeah, bad.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to, since you're in the position to assess that situation, just wanted to ask that briefly. So during all this time in in the U.S. Army and the Reserves and the National Guard, how did you ever think, when am I going to get back to my heat treat? What about metallurgy?
Yeah, so one of the unique things about the reserve component situation is that everybody's dual-hatted, so to speak. They have their civilian life and they have their military life.
Yes.
And I mean, the civilian skills sometimes don't have anything to do with what they do in the Army, but it's a necessary skill. And here's for instance, one of the things that we did when we deployed to the desert was fax machines had just come out, or fax computer cards where you could fax stuff over, but there was no way to secure it. So you couldn't send that information back and forth over a fax line because there was no secure system. And one of my compatriots that worked there was a software guy, and he worked for Alan Bradley. And we cut the cord off of a KY58, which is a secure phone.
Yeah.
And we hooked it up to the computer, and he made a jumper cable so we could fax that stuff back and forth over.
Wow.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Yeah, smart guy.
Yeah, you're able to understand the how behind technologies and say, well, if that's the how and that's the how, I'm going to make this new.
Yeah, I'll make this work.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, he's another one of the guys, and he retired as a full colonel, and good guy. We still have, I have the friends, I call them our friends at King Fahd, the guys that I went to Desert Storm with, and once a month we get together for lunch, and I'm still hearing stories about stuff you didn't know anything that was going on about.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
That is quite interesting, yeah. So when you were back in the States, can you trace your heat treat involvement?
Yeah. So I told you my dad ran a heat treat for a company in Fort Wayne, and then fast forward, he got the wherewithal. He started his own heat treat in Kendallville, Indiana, called Wirco. And it was in the beginning, a struggling organization, cash poor and figuring out how to keep the lights on and keep it going and make money and pay the bills and pay people. And unfortunately, my brother, Dennis, worked for him, but my dad was killed in an aircraft accident unexpectedly. I think he was 53, very young. And my brother was left to run the business. And so we were talking back and forth about, of course, my mom was seriously incapacitated as a result of some surgeries that she had. So she was tied to a wheelchair, so we had to manage her issues. And my brother and I talked it over, and he suggested that we probably just needed to sell the heat treat. And so we found a buyer, and my brother had to agree to stay there and run the thing for 5 years. And so after all the smoke cleared and everything was said and done, we still had a 2-car garage with 2 welders in it. Welder people and equipment, And so I said to him, well, what are we going to do with this? We talked it over, and I said, well, we used to make our own baskets. Maybe we can sell a few. And so that was the beginning of Wirco as it exists today.
And what year was? What was the name of your father? And when did he begin Wirco? Do you remember?
Say again?
What's the name of your father?
Joseph.
Joseph
D. Wright. Don Wright, yeah.
Joseph D. Wright. And when did he start Wirco?
Geez. That would have been 60. It was before I went to Vietnam.
Wow.
No, after that. Okay. So that would have been
7 or 8.
71, maybe.
71. Wow. And then when you talked with DL or Dennis, about doing the fabrications of baskets. That was what year?
So what happened to me was that I had a medical issue and I was grounded from the National Guard. And so when all this happened, that was about that same time frame.
Okay.
So I was running Wirco, the fabrication business, and toward the end of my 12 months, which they were going to permanently retire me at that point. And he came to me and he was very unhappy with running the heat treat because of who he worked for, I guess. And was there room for him in this fabrication little venture that we had going? And I said, I don't think there's room for both of us, but if you want to run this, I'll go back to the Army and do that.
Yeah.
So that's what we decided to do. And over the years, we strategized that we wanted to be the all-source the Walmart of suppliers for the heat treating industry.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a journey, you know. Since my dad started Wirco first existed, it's been over 50 years.
So
and
impressive.
made a lot of decisions along the way that you know, my brother has a great engineering mind in his head. Roloc used to be the standard for baskets, and we were making our baskets out of 1/2 inch 330 and pressure welding the whole thing. And they were making their baskets out of 3/8 or 1/4 inch rod and stick welding every little stick in place. And of course, every weld point's a potential point of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, furnaces went from 18, 24, 12 inches high to 30, 48, 30 high baskets, you know, big. And the requirement for big baskets to be able to handle that kind of material fell right into our timeline, so it worked out well.
That's interesting.
We were at a heat treating show. I still have a picture of that somewhere, and you know how you go there and they have all the booze and the glamour and the glitz. and our first heat treating show was DL and I with a 6 foot long fold up plastic table, and the sign on the back was when you get there to tell you where your booth is. It said Wirco Inc.
Yeah.
That was us.
So you ended up letting DL take the lead on Wirco Fabrications, and you went back to the Army. So to what extent have you been with Wirco, or was that kind of the end of your?
Yeah. So what happened was then some years later, I wasn't actually not very long after that. I needed a full-time job, so I went to my brother, who was then had Wirco moving along, and so he gave me a territory. So I was a Wirco representative for Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee.
And that's probably really beneficial. You knew how to talk the talk with heat treaters and what they needed, and you understood their language from all that experience.
You know, I'd get out there and see opportunities, and for instance, furnace fans. We got into the furnace fan business.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Well, how can you support the furnace?
Yeah.
Yeah. Basket. Well, also fans.
They've done some pretty innovative things over the years. And once we got into the furnace fan business, we, myself included, worked on so that the furnace fans of old all had water-cooled bungs on it, so it would set into the top or side of the furnace, and you'd circulate water through the thing. The fan would heat up, but keep the bearings cool and keep it from seizing up. And
Yes.
I worked with the bearing people here in Indianapolis, and we got a set of bearings designed and with little cooling fans that would sit on the shaft and blow air up through the bearings, and did away with the water on the fan. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm sure it probably prevents some distortion by using air instead of water.
Well, it kept the fan from deteriorating, because generally the problem wasn't that the fan failed.
Yeah.
The corrosion, and the bung would lime up, and then it would heat up, and then the bearings would seize up, and then it would fail, you know.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting. And there's the strategy mind at work as well from the Army, bringing it back in. Let me see. Could you outline also just the different generational ties in heat treat, where they stand now?
Yeah. So I retired fully from everything that I had going on in our lives in 2008. My last assignment, I was the J3, which is the operations officer for the entire National Guard in Washington, D.C. So when I retired from that, Lindsay and I had a home in Florida, and we had a house here in Indianapolis, and we decided to sell the house in Indianapolis and move full-time to Florida. My brother was still running Wirco, and at about that time I started encouraging him to think about a succession plan. And one of the things that's interesting is that Chad, who now runs our business for us very successfully, started working there in grade school, taking the trash out and doing that kind of stuff. And he, over high school and through college, when he was home, had different jobs, so he was intimately familiar with all the things that went on. And he's not a very good welder, but he knows how to weld. We don't let him touch any of the customer products, you know.
Oh yeah, you can work on that, Chad.
He worked in the office for a number of years, and Phil Schlenk, my cousin, who was also part of the family and worked for Wirco, as I would call him, the money guy or the finance guy, and he taught Chad all he knew, or brought him up to speed, taught him how to read his balance sheet and all the things that are important in keeping the business afloat, making sure you're going to make payroll. So DL retired, and I'm still on the board, as is DL, and we have board meetings and we have strategy meetings. But Chad's done a remarkable job of growing the company. Through acquisitions. And in the meantime, one of the big things that happened, the first thing we did, we bought Alloy Engineering and Casting Company in Champaign, Illinois, which is a foundry. And we still own it. And we make castings there. Subsequently, we bought Sal Alloy, who was a direct basket competitor. And we bought Hyper Alloys. And there are a lot of technology, especially when we acquired Hyper, things that they did that we didn't know how to do, but now we do. So.
Nice. Yeah, Chad seems like a really good leader.
Oh.
You know.
The one thing that, I mean, Chad and I had several conversations about leadership in the beginning, and he had the right basis to start with. I took him to school on leadership, and he's just embraced that, and he takes care of his people. I mean, one of our employees developed cancer, and it was a long-term cancer bout for her. It took her over a year to pass. I mean, there was no cure in what she had, and Chad, bless his heart, he just continued to pay her because she needed the money.
Yeah. Really caring for the person beyond the input, output. It's not transactional, it's more.
I mean, Chad, when he goes to the plant, every day he walks around the facility. Wirco has 3 buildings now, and they're not joined together. They're separate places on the land that they own. He goes to every place every day and walks around and talks to the people, and finds out what's working and what isn't, what are your problems, what do we need to do.
Yeah.
He's a good leader. Absolutely. Not only people-wise, but for the business. He's
Yeah.
got a good business head on his shoulders.
Good for him.
Yeah, we're proud of him.
Yeah.
I'm proud of the whole team, actually.
Yeah.
Aaron Fisher runs all the facilities. He's the plant guy.
Okay.
In Avila. Derek, can't remember Derek's last name, but young guy.
Yeah.
Purdue grad. Smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. People person. Has the same mentality as Chad, takes care of his people.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's good. And our customer, we sometimes don't always get reimbursed for some of the things we do. We've had customers call us up and, Friday afternoon and our furnace is down and what am I going to, I don't have a spare. I'm going to get fired kind of thing,
Yeah.
And they will bring us the fan. We'll bring some guys in and build you a new one on Saturday and you put it in on Sunday, be back to work on Monday kind of thing.
Yeah. Looking for solutions.
Yeah.
The problems don't,
Yeah.
they're just challenges.
Yeah.
So then your two sons, they also began a business ancillary to heat treat.
Yeah. Very interesting. So, Nathan, our middle son, I got him a job working for Conrad Cassig, instrument guy, goes around, calibrates instruments, and he went to school on instruments in the course of the business, and so he and I were talking one time, and he was calibrating these instruments, and I said, well, maybe you should start your own business, and we talked it over. So one of the big customers that we first took on was Chrysler Corporation in Kokomo, Indiana. So that was the foundation for starting TrueCal, and just expanded from there. And he's still doing very well.
Wow. Yeah, you must be really proud of them. They seem to.
Yeah.
A lot of your family, the Wright family, a lot of leaders, a lot of creative thinkers, strategy, and.
So our youngest son, Matthew, one of the things that Lindsay and I instilled or tried to instill with Matt or Nathan, didn't take too well on him, but both Matt and Aaron are fluent Spanish speakers.
Yeah.
And so when I retired, Matt took over my territory as a salesman.
Yeah.
And after he was there a while, he told Chad that who's our representative in Mexico? He said, well, we don't have one. And Matt says, well, I want the territory. So, okay. So he gets on an airplane, flies himself down to Mexico. Of course, he speaks the language.
Yeah.
But he didn't know a lot of the technical terms for radiant tube, but he's a fast learner. He picked all that stuff up. And so that's how and while he was down there selling Wirco alloy, you'd go into these heat treats and he'd know that unlike in the United States where we have these inspection stickers plastered all over everything, nobody did inspections down there. And so he called his brother Nathan up and said, hey, here's an opportunity. So that, for months, those two, they would line up these jobs and they would pack up all their stuff and get on an airplane and go to Mexico and spend, 7 days down there working 18 hours a day. And after several months of that, they both said, we can't keep doing this. This is not going to work. And he had met Victor
Zacharias.
Yeah. That runs GTS now.
Yeah.
And he worked for Dana. And he asked Victor if he had any interest in coming to work for Nate and and he said no, he liked his job and he liked his security. And so on a subsequent trip, a month or two later, Victor was taking Matthew back to the airport and he said to Matt, is that job offer still open? Matt said at that point, he was about ready to hang it up. And he said he just looked at the sky and said, thank you, God.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Victor runs the business down there now, and it's very, very successful for those guys, and good for the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting the resources where they need to be.
Yep.
Great partnership, it
Yep.
seems like.
Yep.
That's great. Is there anything as you look at the heat treat industry or what your family is doing at Wirco with TrueCat with C3 data that really excites you about the future?
Mhm. Well, I think from Nathan and Matt's perspective, the software that they're developing for tracking calibrations and furnace acceptability according to the national standards. I mean,
Yeah.
they're light years ahead with the industry. And if you think about how technology's changed and allowed them to do what they're able to do,
Yeah.
I mean, before you would send a technician in there and he'd calibrate all the instruments and he'd take all these notes and he'd have to go back to his hotel room and write up a report and hopefully didn't get numbers transposed and make everything just as it's supposed to be. And now as he goes through with his phone, you know, in the software, he just plugs in the numbers and sends the report to the cloud, and the customer gets it right there. You just download it off the cloud and print it up, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds neat.
And Chad's always looking for ways to improve productivity and make us more efficient.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think between those three young men,
Yeah.
they're an asset to the whole industry.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think that we've recognized all three of them in our young, rising young leaders of heat treat at one point or another. Well deserved. If it were possible to nominate people twice, they'd be nominated 5 times probably.
Yeah.
It's
The program that MTI has for training leaders.
yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the YES program.
Thank you, Joe.
that is such an outstanding program.
Yeah.
I mean, it allows, you know, companies, heat treats or fabricators or whatever, to send their people up and to get trained in leadership and making management decisions. And one of the interesting things I find very interesting about the whole thing is they're a bunch of retired military guys, and they use the military decision-making process to solve problems, you know. And I thought, yeah, I recognize that. Yeah, they're good guys.
I'm not sure how long that decision process is, but if that's something you'd like to share, if there's something else, maybe as a final question, one piece of leadership advice that you would have given to Chad or Nathan or Matt in any of these last years from the military or a synthesis?
I think they already know this, but just to reemphasize it, and they do a good job, is your people are who you are. I mean, your people and your families, and you start thinking about the effects of a person. I mean, you, through his efforts, through the labor, you know, he makes the car payment, he makes the house payment, and eventually, you know, you look at that, Chad's got, I don't know what it is today, over 150 employees. And that's a lot of house payments and car payments and college tuition bills. And, yeah. So great, a good job and a good work ethic and train people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Chad, you know, welders are one of the key employees that we have.
Yeah.
And he started a program called, I forget what he called it, but he got a t-shirt and trying to recruit young high school guys that didn't know anything about welding and make them welders. And he's been successful at that. One time, I know he hired a guy right out of McDonald's, and a year later he put him on the payroll full time.
Wow.
To be a welder. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Changing lives, really. And
yeah.
that's so good. Well, is there anything that we missed that you'd like to make a note of or before we close out our interview?
Well, just speaking about technology and utilizing it, one of the things that Chad not only goes to heat treating shows, but he sends people to other shows, you know, machine shows, that kind of stuff. And we have a huge machining center. So we go to these other shows and you get ideas, welding shows. So we make all our radiant tubes welds with a robot.
What?
So, yeah. And we TIG weld every joint.
Well,
thank you.
Major, it's been really great to talk with you.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this special episode highlight of MG TJ Wright. Follow and like the Heat Treat Radio video podcast so you don't miss alerts when the next episode drops. To learn more about MG Wright, reach out to me at bethany@heattreattoday.com. If this conversation sparked an idea or something you want to hear discussed on Heat Treat Radio, let me know. Heat Treat Radio would like to thank C3 Data for sponsoring this episode. Let C3 Data save you both time and money while helping you to ensure compliance. Go to www.c3data.com. This and every other episode of Heat Treat Radio is the sole property of Heat Treat Today and may not be reproduced in part or in whole without advance written permission from Heat Treat Today. And I'm Bethany Leone. Thank you for listening.